My children's message reminds me of one of my favorite jokes. I've told it before, but once a decade is probably not a bad thing. It's the joke of the little kid Johnny who is going out of church after church was over, and he walks up to the pastor as they're going through the line, and he shakes hands with the pastor, and the pastor looks, and after shaking hands, he's got a quarter in his hand, and he looks at the little kid, and he's like, "Johnny, you gave me a quarter." And he said, "Yeah, that's for you." And he said, "Well, why'd you give me a quarter? I mean, you could do anything you wanted with this quarter. You could buy a piece of candy with it, or you could put it in the offering plate. How about that? Or you could even maybe give it to the poor." And Johnny said, "Well, that's what I'm doing." The pastor was like, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, every Sunday when we get in the car, my dad says, that guy's the poorest preacher I've ever heard." So there you go. How many of you have seen the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory? I'm talking the original one, not the knockoff bad ones. Well, cool. It makes me feel old because I'm referring to a movie now that is 55 years old. That movie is 55 years old. And I'm going to be talking about the end of it, so spoiler alert. If you haven't seen it in the first 55 years, I don't know. I can't save you from that. But that movie is actually, the whole thing's pretty biblical, especially the end. And so I want to just remind those who haven't seen the movie what the movie is about. It's about this eccentric guy, Willy Wonka, that is a hermit and a recluse. Nobody really sees him or knows him. And he owns this chocolate factory, and everybody loves the chocolate. It's set about 100 years ago. And so everybody loves the chocolate, and chocolate's at a premium. And so, they're obsessed with this chocolate. And he wants to invite people in to the chocolate factory, and so he puts 7 golden tickets in 7 candy bars, and they clamor for them, and finally all of the kids show up, these 7 very eclectic, very different children. The focus is obviously on Charlie, who is so poor he couldn't really even afford the money for the chocolate bar, but he winds up getting a bar and it has a ticket in it. And so these 7 children get to tour the chocolate factory with the hopes of winning a lifetime supply of chocolate. Well, by the end of the movie, they've all, because of their own devices, have failed, and it winds up only being Charlie and his grandfather left. And at the end of the tour, Wonka says, "Charlie, thanks, you're done, that's the exit," and he goes into his office. Charlie's grandfather's indignant. Well, where's the lifetime supply of chocolate, right? And so he goes into the office and he starts to confront Wonka, and Wonka gets unbelievably angry, starts screaming and yelling at him, "You get nothing, you lose." And the whole thing kind of unravels. Well, in a moment of clarity, in a moment of kind of a spiritual moment, I would say, in a moment of pure integrity, Charlie walks over and puts the prized everlasting gobstopper that he has on the desk and leaves it for Mr. Wonka. And then as he walks out, Wonka tells him that he's won it all. It's very Old Testament. In the Old Testament, over and over and over again, characters are being tested to check their mettle, to see if they are honest and have integrity, and Charlie does. And it's all very exciting. If you don't see this movie as being an Old Testament kind of biblical movie, I will inform you that the entire movie is not about a rich recluse, not about a chocolate factory, not about a little boy, not even about candy and chocolates. The movie is about the 7 deadly sins. If you watch the movie again, you'll know what I mean. This is a biblical movie from the start. Hate to burst your bubble. I wonder what's going to happen in Netflix. They're going to be like, what happened with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory today in Lincoln, Nebraska? But you're going to want to watch the movie again because it is about the 7 deadly sins. So why do we miss this, right? Why do we miss what the movie is about? Charlie, he does get the factory for sure. He even gets the lifetime supply of chocolate. But do you know what he really gets? He gets exactly what I gave to the children in the children's message. He gets a mission. What Wonka says to him at the very end is, he said, I really can't go on forever, and I don't really want to, so I had to find a child, a very special child, a very honest child. He gives him the factory, yes. He gives him the chocolate, yes. He gives them an upgrade because his family is so poor. I mean, that movie gives us windows of insight into how poor people were 100 years ago. And he doesn't just get an upgrade for his family. Charlie gets a mission. His life from that point forward is to be the chocolate maker. That's what he's learning to do. And we miss that. The whole movie sucks us into thinking about it's the material, sucks us into thinking that it's about the physical things, the chocolate and the candies and the this and the that and the how it's made and blah, blah, blah. And we get drawn into all of that. But the movie is really about Charlie getting this mission. That when you live out your life with integrity, that's what makes you happy. And again, it's a very biblical story. I would say that the story that we heard read from John's Gospel could have easily inspired the story. So I want you to take a look at this text, because it's a text that we oftentimes don't hold by itself enough. It's on page 991 in your Pew Bible again, John 20, starting at verse 19. We usually, when we read this text, dismiss it because it serves us to nothing other than the prequel for the story of Thomas, doubting Thomas. And so we hear this only as a prep for that story, and it's not. It has integrity in and of itself on its own. And the gospel writer, John, does a great job at, just like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, leading us to think of the material and the temporal. So the story is written with a certain vibe. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, so it's the day after Easter, if you will, and the disciples were all locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them. So it's almost written like it was a dark and stormy night. You know, it's written to emphasize the disbelief. Why were they locked in a room? Because they were afraid. Why were they afraid? Because they didn't believe that God had their back. They didn't believe enough. And so they're all locked in hiding. And we don't know how it works. The implied mystery in this text is so amazing, because the mystery of the text is that, the doors were locked. Was Jesus in there when they got there? Those weren't the kind of rooms you could hide in, so it's not like he was in a closet and popped out. So how did he get in there? Well, he must have gotten in there by being a spiritual creature that just beamed himself in. But then what he does is he shows them his hands and feet inside, and so he's clearly a physical thing, but how did he get in there, and how did he get through the locked door? And there's all kinds of making us think. It literally draws us in and makes us think of the physical. And he calms them down. He says, "Peace be with you." He says it twice. And there's joy in celebrating, which is perfect. The struggle is that we miss all that stuff. We're so focused on the stuff that we miss the most important line. Just like in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where every kid wants a lifetime supply of chocolate, and we're all into seeing all that stuff, and the chocolate river, and the fizzy lifting drinks, and all that stuff. We're so focused on that stuff that we forget that Charlie gets his mission. We miss the mission that's here. Jesus says it quite clearly. He says, "Peace be with you." He says it again, "Peace be with you. But as the Father has sent me, so I send you." Because of all of the physical stuff, the spiritual stuff, all this that's going back and forth, we miss the reality that this story is not about the physical stuff. It's not about hands or sides or bodies that have been raised from the dead. This is about the mission. The disciples would have heard it. We know that they did. First of all, they lived in a time way different than ours, but we know that they would have heard it because why? Because each one of them went out of that room, lived out a mission, and then ultimately died as martyrs for their faith. They were sent, and they knew it. We have a harder time with that. Why? Because of the world that we live in. 55 years ago, it was even different than it is today. But we are so immersed in the physical, we are so immersed in what we can get, what we can have, what we can garner, what we can control, what we can buy, the gifts that get given to us. I once heard a pastor say, and I've never forgotten it, that talking to Christians, North American Christians, about consumerism is like talking to a fish about water. We're so immersed in it, we cannot see it. And we are so immersed in all of the stuff that we read this story as being stuff. And it's not. It's a story about mission. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. In verse 21. God doesn't say this solely to the 12. Jesus doesn't just give them that command. He says it to us. This is why it's God's living word. Each one of you, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. Each one of you has a mission. Each one of you has a purpose. And the hard part about that is figuring it out. Discerning it, seeing it, understanding what we are supposed to do in the world. That's really the hard work that we've been given. We are sent in the same way. What today would you say is keeping you from that? Are there physical, material things that are withholding the vision for mission in your life? What's getting in your way? And maybe you have figured out your mission and vision in life. Great. The key is to not let yourself be distracted by the things of this world. And that's super hard to do. In the series, Rise and Shine, again, we're going through the biblical text of the resurrection. We're seeing how Jesus, the risen Christ, shone in different ways, just like he did in this text with that whole spiritual to physical thing. And then we are getting your stories. Again, I want to encourage you to submit your story online. But then we're also uplifting stories of Sheridan members whose lives parallel the text. And today I'm going to raise up the story of Con Pardee. Now, we told Con's story years and years ago on a Wednesday night during Lent, but it so matches this. I asked him if we could tell his story again today. Con grew up east of Beatrice in Gage County with father and mom. Mom was Tina, and they farmed and did fine. But Dad, over the course of time, became an alcoholic. And the deeper he got into alcoholism, the more mental health issues that he had. Con was one of 6 children, and Tina did everything she could to keep that house together. Milking a couple times a day, giant vegetable garden, canning so that there's stuff. But it just was an impossible situation. Dad was angry and violent and drunk. And after one particularly violent episode, the sheriff came and took him away. And that made that family more secure and safe in some ways, but it didn't make it any easier. Tina, what we would say back in those days is she rubbed nickels together to try to get quarters. And she did everything she could to provide for her 6 children with very little resources at hand. Made a huge impression on Con and his siblings, as this woman worked so hard to secure a life for them all. Con was privileged to be able to go to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He studied and became a financial planner. Con is now the managing director of his own office, managing partner of his own office with Raymond James. And he found his mission when he found that work, because his work has been to not just be successful for himself, but make sure that the people who are his clients are themselves financially stable and successful. And it has been his mission in life, and he has succeeded at it. And yet, despite all of the success, the ability to have things, he's never lost sight of his mission to provide, but also he's never forgotten his mother. Con has served with honor in the community as a whole. He's been a member here for more than 50 years. He heads up a hospitality team here. I'm proud of him because he has done 3 stints as a confirmation small group leader, and that ain't easy. And this afternoon, he will watch his grandson affirm his faith and get confirmed, which is awesome. But Con has also been one of the driving forces of our Sheridan Foundation, and actually made a donation to create a fund in name of his mother, the Tina Fund. And Tina's fund supports families and situations that support families who are poor. And when we've had our big community events where we have hundreds of people making meals, 36,000 meals for Kids Against Hunger, the Tina Fund has been a driving force in underwriting those kinds of efforts. Always aware of his mission, his history, and always seeking to honor his mother. That's rising from the mire to shine. I'll just end with the last line from the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. As they're kind of floating away into the sky, and Wonka has hugged Charlie, and he says to him the very last thing, "Charlie, never forget what happened to the guy who suddenly got everything he ever wanted in life." And he said he lived happily ever after. Easily mistaken, but point being, to this guy who gave a child the child's mission, always remember what happens when we have our mission in life and we live a life that is mission-oriented. If we do that, if we live out our mission, indeed we live happily ever after. And I pray it be so. Amen.